Hi, I'm Norm Abram. Welcome to the new Yankee Workshop. Over the years, we've built quite a few clocks here. The first one was a tall pine clock. Then we built a shaker wall clock. A few years ago, we built a tall case oak clock. It had a full mechanical movement, worked by weights, and it had chimes. They're very popular, so today we're going to build another clock. This one will be called the new Yankee shop clock. It's a wall clock that you can hang in your shop or in your living room. It has a spring-wound movement and chimes. But before we get started, we're going to pay a visit to the Willard Clock Museum, not far from here in Grafton, Massachusetts. That's next, right here in the new Yankee Workshop. Today we're in central Massachusetts in an area known as the Blackstone Valley. The town is Grafton, Massachusetts. We're at the Willard House and Clock Museum. The house was built in 1718 for the Willard family, the most distinguished clockmakers in all of New England. Today we're going to get a tour from the director, John Stevens.
Norm, why don't you come into the parlor and let me show you a few things here. This is Simon Willard. Simon was the second of the Willard clockmakers, one of four brothers. This is his chair and his desk from his Roxbury home. And the tall clock was made by his older brother Benjamin. And Benjamin was the first of the four Willard clockmakers to make clocks here in Grafton. The clock dates to about 1775, and it's the phoenix and the brass dial that helped date the clock. It's also numbered 138, which indicates it's a very early clock.
Well, that is a beautiful dial. Wow. And the wood appears to be cherry, which would have been a local hardwood.
Right, it did come from this area.
There's something missing up here. Shouldn't there be a finial there?
The center finial was removed on this clock because these were designed for homes that would have been in the center of town. A merchant would have owned this clock, not a farmer.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a beautiful clock, but what we're looking for is a wall-hung clock with maybe a painted panel in the door.
Let's go into the main gallery. I have a few there I can show you.
Okay.
Norm, let me show you a few clocks here in the main gallery. At the end of the room is a gallery clock. This was made by Simon Willard in 1804 for the First Church of Roxbury, which was his family's home church.
Mm-hmm. And what's the case made out of?
The case is made of pine, the dial is made of mahogany, and it's been painted.
So the pine is gilded.
Right, it's gold leaf. But you asked about a painted panel clock, and let me show you one here behind you. This is a Massachusetts shelf clock. The glasses are actually reverse painted. It means that it's painted on the inside rather than the outside of the glass.
Mm-hmm. And how do they do that?
They start with the smallest details, the gold leaf, and then they work backwards, adding colors and layers.
Wow, sounds complicated. How does it work?
These clocks, as all Willard clocks, are weight driven and have a pendulum, and you can just barely make out the pendulum there in the back.
Mm-hmm. You know, it would be nice if we could see the pendulum through the glass on the clock I want to do.
I think I can show you one down in the clock shop downstairs if you want to go take a look.
Sure.
Norm, this is the workshop of David Gow, our conservator. He actually made all the cabinets himself, and this is where he repairs all the Willard clocks.
So he's a woodworker and a conservator.
He does it all.
Wow, look at this tiny little lathe. What would he be doing here?
He's polishing a pivot.
Because he's trying to make it smoother.
Right.
Wow. Ooh, what's this?
These are a couple of reverse painted tablets. Mm-hmm. These are reproductions.
Boy, beautiful work, and the marquetry is gorgeous. Now, what's going on here? This one looks like it's all apart.
David's taken the movement apart of an Aaron Willard Jr. Boston improved timepiece, and he'll clean this, oil it, and reassemble it.
And how old is this clock?
This clock dates to about 1825.
Wow.
And here's what you came to see. This is the improved timepiece with the lower panel with an open section where you can see into the pendulum swinging back and forth.
Yeah, that's great. That's what we're looking for. You know, a lot of these clocks have very intricate scenes, and you have this movement of the pendulum. Why were such clocks made? There's a lot of effort put into these.
This was something that the people of that day would find fascinating or interesting, to see the movement of the pendulum. And you will see on most of the improved timepieces space left in the glass where you can actually see the mechanism or the movement of the pendulum bob.
Mm-hmm. So it's sort of entertainment of the day.
It could be, yes.
Well, you've given us a lot of great ideas for our workshop clock. Thanks for the tour.
Thanks for coming.
Well, here it is, our version of the new Yankee shop clock. Now, once again, we partnered with our friends in Wisconsin who set us up with Clockworks for the tall case clock a couple years ago. And this time they provided us with a wind-up movement, this dial face, which has since 1988 written across the top, which is when we started the show, and my signature down below, and a nice set of clock hands. Then down here, they laid out the New Yankee Workshop logo. Now I have a confession to make. When we got this, all the area behind my image was clear, and it just didn't pop out. So what I did this morning is I added a little masking tape to the back, and that seems to do the trick. Now you can really see it. So when you get your version, that'll be taken care of in the silkscreen process. We built our clock out of black walnut. It's about 5¼ inches deep, about 28 inches high. I want to start by building the case. So over here on my stock cart, I've lined up the materials I'm going to need, and I'm going to start with these 3 pieces, which are 5/8 of an inch thick, ripped the right width. First I want to cut them to length. The back of the case is made of a piece of 1/2 inch plywood, and I want to rabbet that into the side so that it won't show through the edges. So I've set up my stacked dado head cutter with my sacrificial fence. I've made a test pass, and now I'm ready to run my pieces. Let me show you how I join the pieces together. I made a rabbet in the side pieces to receive the top and bottom. We'll do that next. I still have the stacked dado. I've just moved the fence slightly, and now I've brought my miter gauge in to hold the pieces as I push them through. Let's take a look at the panel on which the dial face is mounted. It's a piece of 3/8 inch plywood, and it sits in a groove that goes across the top and down each side, and it stops right even with the bottom. I want to make those grooves next. To make that groove, I've set up a 3/8 inch spiral cutting bit in the router table, set it 1/4 inch above. I've adjusted the fence to be in the right position, and I've put some marks on the fence here which show the leading and trailing edges of the bit. On my wood, I've put a mark where I want to stop. So now I can just run the pieces through. Now on the other side, I simply can't push it through. I'm going to have to drop it onto the bit and then push it through. For the top, the groove goes all the way through, no stop. All right, to square up the corner, a nice sharp chisel takes care of that. Now here we have the works. And if you look at this side, this center shaft is for the hands. Then these 3 square shafts are used to wind the clock. And this lever is the silencer to silence the chimes. Now here's the board on which it gets mounted, as well as the dial face. I've laid out the holes for the hands and for the winders, and a slot for the silencer. We'll drill those out next. Now those 2 1/4 inch holes begin the slot for the silencer. I'll finish it with my jigsaw. Perfect. Now you'll note that I used a piece of 3/8 inch thick plywood as a panel to mount the movement because I wanted something nice and solid. But in order for the shaft that the hands will be on to have enough clearance in the front, I have to relieve the back slightly. So I'm using this Forstner bit, going down about a 1/16 of an inch. The most important thing is that all the holes are drilled to the same depth. I could have done this with a router, but the setup is just too complicated. Now I can take the Clockworks, slide it through the holes, and you'll see that that dial shaft is sticking up just the right amount. Now I'm just going to give it a coat of flat black paint. Well, now I'm ready to glue the sides of the case together with that dial panel in place. So a little bit of glue, and this has a brown tint to it, so if there's a little glue line, we won't see that later. It'll disappear. What I'm going to do is set this in the groove, put the pieces together, and then clamp it. Okay, before I brad it, I'm going to check the diagonal measurements corner to corner, and when they're equal, I know it's square. These 1¼ inch brads will help hold it together while the glue sets, and they won't be seen later. I've sized 2 pieces of 1/2 inch plywood for the back of the case, and I've made a rabbet in each piece. This piece is going to be the lower part, and it'll be permanently fixed later. The top part I want removable so I can adjust the chimes. I also want to paint the inside of the lower piece a gloss white so I can see it through the glass. Have a look at the door. That's next. Made out of 5/8 inch thick walnut. There are 2 stiles, a top rail, a bottom rail, and a mid rail. They all have a bead detail around the edge. I want to make that first. Here I've taken one of those beaded pieces and made a 3/8 by 3/8 rabbet in the back side, and that's going to receive the glass panel. I want to show you the joint between the rail and stiles with these sample pieces. On the stile, I want to remove part of the bead with a miter, and on the rail, I just want to clip the corners so they'll fit together like this. So I'm going to do the stiles first. I've tipped the blade to 45 degrees, set the height correctly, and a stop block so it'll make the cut in exactly the right place. Now I want to remove this piece to the miter cut. So I've squared the blade back up, and I've set the fence to cut right along this edge. I'll cut most of it with the saw. I'll finish it off with a chisel. Now I'm taking the rails, and I've just made a tiny little rabbet. And that slips in like this. You'll see that it slips into the rabbet for the glass, and it'll give me a nice tight joint to the front. Now I can clip the corner of the bead to complete the miter. Okay, let's see how we did. Oh, that's going to be nice. That's good. Now I want to work on that mid rail. It's 1 inch wide, it has a bead on each edge, and I've mitered the corners on the end. For the stile, I make 2 miter cuts and remove the material between to get a joint like this. After I'm done making the joint, I'm going to rip down this mid rail to match the thickness of this bead. And it cleans up pretty well with a chisel. Now I'm going to glue and dowel the joints together for the door. I'm going to start with the gluing operation, set the pieces in place, and clamp them. Now I'll set the mid rail the same way. Glue alone is not going to be enough to hold this joint together, so I'm going to dowel it using this step dowel, which also happens to be mahogany. They come in different species and sizes, and there's a matching drill bit. First thing I'm going to do is drill the hole. No need for a jig. Now a little bit of glue. Spread it out with a brush. Nice thin coat. I don't want too much. And then I simply set it into the hole and drive it home. They actually say that with the step dowel, it actually sucks the pieces together. Now all I have to do is trim off the excess. It's as simple as that. Well, here are the elements we have so far. An assembled case, the pieces for the back, and an assembled door. Now I want to start working on the trim moldings at the top and the bottom. I'm going to start with these 2 pieces of 3/8 inch stock. One is for here, one is for here, and I want to round 3 edges at the router table. Now it's time to make some moldings. I want to make one down here, which runs from the bottom of that piece I just made to this area. It's a cove shape. and another one up here which has a larger cove and a little bead. Well, I'm lucky. I happen to have a molding machine. It has a cutter head with 2 knives that turn at a very high rate of speed. I happen to have a set of knives from an earlier project which will work well for this one. Now, if you didn't have a molding machine, you could head down to your local lumberyard or home center, and you might find something in the stock moldings that would work fine. Now, I have to make a couple more modifications here at the table saw. For the last few minutes, I've been fitting some of the pieces of molding, mitering the corners. It's going to get glued and attached with some brads to this panel. I'll set it in position, clamp it, and then put a couple brads in from the other side. Now I'm going to add some pieces of poplar on the inside edge of the molding to give me more nailing area for the final piece. Now that's the bottom panel. All right, now I'm just going to center this panel on the bottom and attach it with a few pin nails. For the top section of molding, I first applied these poplar cleats to the panel. Now I'm fitting the molding, which has mitered corners, and I'll attach that with some pin nails. Now a couple glue blocks to add some reinforcement to the joint, and then another little one back here for the back edge of the molding. I want to attach these hangers now, and this will allow us to hang the clock on the wall later. A couple magnets will help keep the door closed. Now let's attach this top assembly. A few screws will hold it in place. Now with the clock upside down, I can attach the bottom assembly. A little glue, centered, and a few brads. Now for the clock works. The most critical thing is to take the shaft on which the hands are going to go and center it in that hole. Once it's centered, I can attach it with some screws. Here's the lower backboard, and I've installed this spacer to properly align the chime rods. All right, with the chime rod screwed to the backboard, that just slips in here, and later I'll permanently attach that. The remaining part of the back will be attached with screws so that it's removable so that we can adjust the clockworks later. And with that done, I think we're ready for the finishing room. The finish for our clock is going to be a 2-part process. First, I'm staining it with this dark walnut oil-based stain, and once that dries, I'll put several coats of a wipe-on polyurethane on to protect it. Well, the poly has dried and we're out of the finish shop, and I can complete the installation. Here's the backboard, the lower portion of it with the chime rod assembly reattached. Just going to drop that down in there and attach it with a few brads. The instructions that come with the clockworks are very detailed when it comes to aligning these hammers with the chime rods, and that'll take some time. It also means that I want to have the upper section of the back removable to make those adjustments. So we'll secure it with a few screws. Now I'm ready for the dial face. I want to center it on the shaft for the hands, and the wind-up shafts. And here's that silencer rod that I had to offset so it would come through the face properly. Now once it's lined up, I'll attach it with some little nails. Now for the hands. First the hour hand, and that can go in any position. It's just pressed on. Then the minute hand, and you can see there's a square on the back of it, and that will only go on the shaft in one way. The instructions go into great detail on how to align these properly, and then a little tiny nut to hold it on. Now it's time for the hinges, and these don't require any mortising, just a surface mount. And here's the other half of the magnetic catch. Just pre-drill the hole for the nail. Tap it in. All right, now I'm ready for the glass panel. And that drops in. Get it centered. And I've pre-cut some pieces of quarter-round molding which will hold it in place. And we'll secure those with a few pin nails. Now I can attach the door to the case with a few screws. Well, there it is, keeping time but badly out of tune. That'll take a while to fix. But once that's done, it'll be ready for many years in the workshop or in the living room.